What's up, everybody? And today we're going to be reacting to Soviet flying aircraft carriers were ingenious, which that whole sentence is baffling to me. Soviet flying aircraft carriers. We're going to learn all about it in this video. It's by Mustard. We've watched one of their videos before, and the quality of information and production was phenomenal. It really was. So I'm very excited for this one. It's going to be fun. Sit down, get yourself a cup of tea, relax, and let's learn some stuff, shall we? Before we get started, as always, there'll be a link to the original video in the description. If you want to check out the original video without me waffling over the top of it, go to the original video, check it out, give it a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff on their video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe on my videos as well. That would help with that mysterious YouTube algorithm. But for now, let's shut up, let's pull this up, and let's have a cheeky peek.
In August 1941, 3 lumbering Soviet bombers head towards Nazi-Allied territory. But these are no ordinary bombers, because for years, the Soviets have been secretly developing a new kind of weapon.
Whoa.
Flying aircraft carriers, designed to pierce through enemy lines to deploy a swarm of fighter planes and dive bombers. Nothing like it had ever been seen before. And with the Soviet Union's darkest hour approaching, these massive juggernauts are about to make history because they're headed straight for enemy territory.
I'm trying to make a guess on whether or not these are successful or not, and whether they're actually efficient. But I honestly can't even wrap my head around that it's even a real thing for me to make a guess on it. The Zveno project? Is that how you pronounce it? Someone let me know how you pronounce that in the comments, will you?
By the 1930s, it was clear that aircraft would play an essential role in future conflicts. But there was a problem that had plagued aircraft designers from the very beginning. Large, heavy bombers could carry lots of fuel, so they could fly great distances. But fighter aircraft, which had to be light and agile, could carry only enough fuel to cover a short distance. This mismatch had consequences. While bombers could fly deep into enemy territory, their fighter escorts couldn't. And over hostile airspace, the bombers were often on their own. With only a handful of machine guns to fend off enemy fighters, they were vulnerable and suffered heavy losses. But in 1930, Soviet engineer Vladimir Vakhmistrov came up with a radical solution.
Actually, it's pretty straightforward. If you could have the bombers carry the fighters, they could be transported over great distances and deployed whenever they were needed.
Okay, here's my guesstimation. It's good, but my presumption is the amount of fuel that the bombers would need would have to increase carrying that amount of load. Or would it be okay considering that it's got more sets of wings? Although more wings doesn't equate to more efficient flying. I can't wrap my head around if this is going to work or not.
First, Vakhmistrov's idea fell on deaf ears. The Red Army was focused on strength through numbers, not gambling on unproven ideas.
Yeah.
But Vakhmistrov pressed on.
Comrades, flying aircraft carriers have tremendous potential. The fighters could not only protect the bombers, they could be fitted with their own bombs to make precise strikes against more challenging targets. Or they could be carried far out to sea to attack naval fleets which would otherwise be out of range.
The idea of it is good. I think it's the recovery, which is the difficult part, right? So if it can only go, let's use numbers, if it can go 100 miles out, then the only reason it can go 100 miles out is because it can also do 100 miles back, right? But if the bomber takes it 200 miles out, then it only needs to come 200 miles back, and that's the same amount. So I get that, but is it as simple as that?
The fighters could even clear the path for our bombers by destroying enemy anti-aircraft guns in advance or by blinding them with smoke screens, making accurate targeting impossible. Flying aircraft carriers could also patrol our borders.
These animations are brilliant.
Ready to intercept enemy bombers before they made it anywhere near their targets.
Yeah.
The strategic benefits couldn't be ignored, not even by the Red Army.
The visuals on this are fantastic.
The platform for Vakhmistrov's aircraft carriers would be the mighty TB-1 and TB-3. As the largest bombers of their time, they had plenty of power to carry the fighters. But figuring out where to attach them was the tricky part. In the wrong spot, the fighters would interfere with the bomber's control,
Yeah.
or airflow would make launching them impossible. And in an era before sophisticated wind tunnels, it would all have to be figured out through trial and error.
Oh my god.
Buckminster would call his creation Zveno, and he would end up flight testing more than a dozen configurations.
Oh my god, look at these configurations. Oh my god, look at this one. The PVO. It's got 5 aircraft on it. Holy shit. That's crazy. My presumption is number 3 would probably be the best right here. Or the SPB. Just 2 underneath. My presumption is 2 underneath. Or the Zeno 6 up here and the 7. I think if you've got stuff on top, I think it would interfere with it. I don't know. You got to learn a lot of physics for this, haven't you?
In some models, the fighters were mounted above the wings, in others, suspended below.
Yeah.
One arrangement even saw 5 fighters carried at once.
That's crazy.
Remarkably, instead of weighing the bomber down, the fighters actually helped to boost their performance. Because during flight, the fighters would run their engines continuously, while drawing fuel from additional tanks fitted to the bomber.
So the bomber would have to carry more fuel, and they'd be refueled through the bomber. The fighters would be. That's interesting.
This brilliant setup allowed the bombers to fly faster, climb higher, and lift even more than they could have without the fighters attached. Launching the fighters was fairly straightforward. As long as the bomber was kept steady, any reasonably skilled pilot would manage. But reattaching to the carrier was another matter. On later versions, a trapeze-like system allowed pilots to dock with the carrier to take on more fuel.
Whoa.
But docking was a skill that would take time to master. During flight, the fighters would communicate with the carrier using a telephone system, and a series of lights mounted in front of their gun sights would further signal commands.
It's crazy how bad technology, how much technology has progressed since then, and how they suffered because they didn't have the technology we have now. Like, think about the comms, and they don't have regular radio like we do, like not regular signal like we do, so they had to do all these other weird things like using lights to communicate. Oh my god, like, you've got to be so, like, it's almost as if back then the pilots themselves had more to do than the aircraft, but now there's so much that the aircraft can do that the pilots have to be switched onto that. So it's as if it takes a different type of brain, doesn't it? A different type of skill from a pilot then to a pilot now completely. It's so strange.
Everyone was pleased with how Zveno flew, but on the ground, things were more challenging. To load the fighters over the wings, we'd need all the help we could get, calling over mechanics, ground controllers, and anyone else unfortunate enough to be at the airfield. We all wondered if we could ever get used to such a strenuous task. And then everything changed for the better when we were provided with a tractor. Of course, this happened only thanks to the Soviet Communist Party and the wisdom of our great leader, Comrade Joseph Stalin.
But the flying aircraft carrier concept was viable, and Buckminster had laid the groundwork for something truly remarkable.
It's very strange, isn't it?
Buckminster envisioned building enormous airborne motherships capable of carrying more than 20 fighters. He also wanted to develop purpose-built fighters that wouldn't need heavy landing gear and could be built with smaller wings for greater speed and maneuverability. Of course, these ideas would have to wait until the Zveno carriers had proven useful to the Red Army.
I mean, I get what he's trying to go with here. I just don't think that well, obviously it didn't work out, did it? Obviously, because we don't have it. If any technology back then was efficient and worked well, it would still be around now, right? In some way, in a different iteration, but it would still be around now. And obviously you don't see anything like this anymore. But the whole idea of it is very unique and interesting, isn't it?
But after years of development, that turned out to be far more difficult than anticipated. Back in 1932, the Red Army seemed eager to accept the first version. But when new I-5 fighters became available, Buckminster was ordered to modify his design. Then, when more powerful 4-engine TB3 bombers were introduced, Buckminster was once again sent back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
It was the same story when I-16 fighters became available. It wasn't until 1939, nearly a decade after the project started, that the Red Army finally accepted the carriers, with an order for 40 carriers equally divided amongst the Navy and Army. But
So it took a lot of iterations and technology to regress to it, which is it's very common. Someone has an idea and they're like, yeah, it's really good, but we got to wait for the technology to catch up for it to be able to work.
By this point, some military planners were beginning to doubt the whole project. For one, the TB-3 bomber was now obsolete. Next to a modern aircraft like the American B-17, the TB-3 with its crude lines looked more like farm equipment.
Yeah.
There were doubts about whether the slow, lumbering bombers could still be effective in combat. Meanwhile, the situation in Europe was beginning to worry the Soviets. By 1940, Nazi Germany had conquered much of Europe, and military planners feared that the Soviet Union was next. With war on the horizon, resources were shifted to the production of proven weapons, and it meant only 5 Zveno carriers were ever delivered.
You think about how quickly technology progressed during World War II as well. Like, the technology was, like, unreal quick, probably quicker than it's ever been before. And the escalation between the start and the end of the war was so rapid that I feel like new things like this, which are not new, they're not like brand new on their own. They're using equipment and adapting it to something else. It just probably couldn't keep up with how quick the iterations were going through. That's probably all it was.
And even those were pulled from duty in the summer of 1940, dismantled and put into storage. It seemed like Vachmistrov's efforts would amount to nothing. But the Soviet Union's darkest hour was approaching, and Zveno carriers were about to make history. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched a massive attack on the Soviet Union. Unprepared, Soviet defenses quickly crumbled. In the south, the Red Army scrambled to slow the advance towards the vital port cities of Odessa and Sevastopol by launching counterattacks on Nazi-allied Romania. A critical target for the Soviets was the King Carol I Bridge, as its destruction would cut a vital railway and oil pipeline and disrupt the flow of supplies to Romanian troops. For days, the Soviets tried to take out the bridge using conventional bombers. But each time, the bombers missed their targets and faced heavy resistance from anti-aircraft guns and enemy fighters.
Just think of how chaotic it was back then. During World War II, my God, the guts of some of these people. Like, you're pretty much going out, whether it's boots on the ground, out at sea, or in the air, knowing that every mission you're doing might be the last you'll ever do. And you've got to come to terms with that. Absolutely unreal.
It was soon apparent that only precision dive bombers would have any chance of destroying the bridge. But the Soviet Union was critically short on capable dive bomber crews, and existing fighters lacked the range to reach the bridge. So the Red Army raced to pull the Zveno carriers from storage and bring them back to working order. Ordinarily,
it's such a cool
I-16
design.
fighter loaded up with nearly a third of its weight in bombs would have never made it off the runway. But the heavily loaded Zveno carriers had no trouble lifting off. Before striking the bridge, the Zveno pilots cut their teeth attacking an oil refinery. 40 kilometers from the target, 4 fighters detached from their carriers and headed towards the...
I'd love to have seen real footage of that. Can you imagine seeing the actual footage? Imagine being a soldier and seeing a bomber come towards you and you're like, wait, has it got smaller aircraft attached to it? And then they come loose and then they start coming towards you and you're like, oh my God, what is going on?
Refinery. Patrolling fighters didn't even try to intercept the I-16s. After all, a Soviet fighter could never have made it so far behind enemy lines, so they were assumed to be friendly. The Zveno fighters made a devastating attack on the refinery. Amongst the confusion, the enemy couldn't even return fire. The first ever use of Zveno in combat was a huge success.
Wow.
In the early hours of August 10th, 3 Zveno carriers left to attack the King Carol Bridge. Although one carrier had to turn back due to mechanical problems, the remaining fighters pushed on. Taking on heavy anti-aircraft fire, they managed to strike the bridge. But while damaged, it remained standing. So 3 days later, the attack was repeated. This time, 6 fighters launched from the carriers. Again, they were met with fierce anti-aircraft fire.
Can you imagine, right, during these fights, if the Allied forces just had one F-22 and it just appeared and all of these Nazis were like, is that a spaceship? And then it just absolutely obliterates everything on its own. Just dances around everything and then takes off, and no one says anything. And everyone's like, what the fuck was that? Can you imagine?
But the nimble I-16s managed to score 5 direct hits, completely destroying one of the bridge's spans, and they returned home without any losses.
Wow.
The Svenno carriers were proving to be far more useful than originally thought, capable of making sudden and unexpected attacks against difficult-to-reach targets. On August 17th, Svenno carriers destroyed a dry dock in Constanta. On the 28th, they destroyed crossings on the Dnieper River,
crap.
helping to significantly slow the advance of Nazi troops.
So they really were successful. So why the downfall? I'm sure it's going to get to that. Why the downfall of them then?
On September 9th, after yet another successful bombing raid, 2 I-16 fighters shot down a pair of Bf-109s. But after that, records stopped.
Interesting.
The Soviet Union was only at the beginning of the most devastating war in history. Svenno carriers continued to fly under increasingly dire circumstances, and little is known about their ultimate fate, but there were at least 30 successful missions.
30 successful missions is quite substantial, so why did it just disappear then? That's very strange.
Well, outdated by the time they saw action, the carriers proved to be highly effective, even if they were ultimately a desperate attempt to do what could have been done with modern capable dive bombers. And once dive bombers and well-trained crews became available in larger numbers, Svenno fell out of favor.
Yeah.
But Vachmistrov wasn't alone in his dream.
So the technology just got old. I think that's what it is, and they didn't iterate on it with newer stuff. That's pretty much it.
The United States experimented with enormous aircraft-carrying airships, and later bombers to carry fighters over great distances. But the concept always seemed a little too ahead of its time. Until the 1960s, when emerging technologies promised to open up new possibilities. Major advances in aerodynamics, exotic new materials, and propulsion would soon pave the way for aircraft many times larger than anything in existence.
Whew.
And in 1969, Lockheed studied the concept in detail.
Whoa, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So 22 aircraft.
Examining the strategic advantages that a true airborne carrier could offer. The Lockheed CL-1201 is one of the most bizarre and fascinating aircraft studies ever produced. And you can learn more about it in my feature coming this month to Nebula.
Damn.
Nebula is where you'll find hours.
All right, I think the last bit of this is just an ad for Nebula, which...
And the M50 Bounder.
Yeah, which is really good. You should check out Nebula. I've checked it out a few times, actually, and I genuinely really like it. What a great video by Mustard. That's the second, I think, video, or maybe third video I've watched of theirs. And every time the quality is some of the best I've seen on YouTube when it comes to military gear. So if you haven't already, go over there, give it a subscribe, a like, and all that good stuff. They definitely deserve it. Absolutely fantastic videos. The animations are brilliant. The information's brilliant. Really, really, really enjoy it. There'll be a link in my description. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Helps with that mysterious YouTube algorithm. And if you've got any suggestions for the next video, let me know in the comment section down below. Other than that, that's it. I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.